We're so excited to welcome you back to our John summation. Not just a study tonight, we are going to do the summation of the book of John. So start your clocks, start your engines, get ready. We're going to be here for 17 hours because it's going to at least about 45 minutes per chapter. No, I'm just kidding.
At least 12.
I don't have that kind of level of filibuster in me to stand that long.
I feel like you do, though.
I probably could. So today we're going to worship together in a way that we take this word and we really let it be something for our life. So I hope that as you, maybe you caught last week's sermon, maybe you've caught several of our studies as we've gone along. Each study is like it's like a whole dissertation in itself. Okay. And that's the thing about the book of John. Mm-hmm. Even with all the time that we've spent on the book of John, we haven't even gotten started. And yet, I hope that you found something along the way. So as we wrap up the book of John, I think there's a couple things we need to look at. And let me give you an overview as we start this, and then tell you what we're going to hit home tonight as we look at these endings. And you did catch that right. It's plural. It's endings. Okay? What is John? In the beginning. Not when Jesus was born. Not Christmas that we're about to celebrate.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Word, Jesus. And Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. All the way back in Genesis. Okay?
Yeah.
So now we're talking about the entirety of the creation of the world. Jesus has been with us. Yeah. Who is the Word? Who is Jesus? Well, for 19 chapters in your Bible, you can pick up with John 1:1 and read all the way into chapter 19. And all through that, this is what you're going to find, as we found along the way. Find 7 I am statements. 7 statements of, I am God this way or that way, in this manifestation, in this piece. So, for instance, in his definitions, I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the good shepherd. I am the living water. I am, and you can fill in the blanks on those as you look those up. And what does that really do? Well, it's taking something that happened. Remember, John 1 is going all the way back to Genesis. The I ams are going all the way back to Exodus. And so now we're fulfilling what God said he would do all along, about leading us and shepherding us and saving us and bringing manna from the heavens and giving it to us in our hour of need, being our daily bread. So through 1 through 19, we define now. Through the life of Jesus Christ, we define who Jesus is. And if that was just the book of John, that'd be astounding. If that definition was there, and in fact, if you know this, and I've said this several times over the last several years, that when a culture is found with a new language that the Bible has not been translated into yet, they always start with this book. Just in case the funding runs out, just in case something goes wrong, if you want to know who Jesus is and you're trying to tell it to a culture who the Bible has quite literally never been printed in their native language or tongue, John is the one they do. Because the definition of John is in the I am statements. The definition of John, of Jesus, the definition of Jesus is in the man who walks on water, the man who turns water into wine, the man who makes the blind see, and he calls out this crazy guy named Lazarus out of the dead and into life. Let's define Jesus as the Word, who's been with God in the beginning. And if that's all John was, it's one of the most valuable books of the Bible. But there's something else that John does too. There's something else that John has put in there from the very beginning, and this is what Lindsay's been helping to weave through all this, and it's about the word belief. Tell us about belief in John.
Yes, I think, I think for me it's been interesting just to see the Gospel of John in the lens of belief. Again, kind of like you said, Preston, if John is all about who is Jesus and kind of this idea of him being the Messiah. Again, when we have all these narrations and these third persons that kind of break the window and say, hey, don't forget about this, it's been really interesting to not just story tell about the person of Jesus and who he is, but really hone in on the kind of why he's the Messiah and the fulfillment that's been happening in the Old Testament. So again, going back to John 1 in the beginning, everything is leading up to who is Jesus. And it's because, again, the SparkNote version, the cool word historicity, so it was written as one of the last books of the gospel. So it's taking from Mark, from Luke, from Matthew, all of those books together and saying, yes, those do matter. Yes, these are the good stories. This is what's happening. But here's another perspective. Here's another lens to look at Jesus. And so that's why John is so important. It takes all of those together, tries to combine the big moments, the big parts, and then adds more to it, adds that depth and that almost intricacy and complexity of Jesus and kind of the Old Testament and tying it all together. And one of those big ways that it does that is through belief. So even at the very beginning, we have Jesus coming in, again, not with a birth story too much, but really honing in on the calling of his disciples and calling of the world. So already we have the belief of the people that are around Jesus. And then we get into the disbelief of the world as well. And so we have this tension already created of belief and disbelief, and for the world and for the public until we hit Lazarus. And Lazarus is that moment and that turning point of Jesus' ministry where he hones in a lot on the disciples. So he goes back in, and this is where we get the washing of the feet and the last few days of Jesus' ministry and here on earth, and get into the idea of just disbelief and belief again of the world and belief of his disciples. So we get that depth coming in. And then we have the death, we have the resurrection, and just as we talked about last week, the ascension. That's not yet, but Jesus coming back on earth and being with his disciples again. And for me, and what I would love to talk about is John 20, verses 21. Just kidding, I'm in John 3. John 20, 30 and 31 is kind of where I think the kind of big summary statement of John is. Now, Preston has another kind of statement that he'll talk about, but for me, it's these words. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciple, which are not recorded in this book. It's kind of interesting. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, with these two verses, it almost harkens back, and does harken back, to John 3:16 and John 3:17. So hear these words again. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in me shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into this world to condemn the world, but to save it. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stays condemned already because they have not believed in God's name and his only Son. The verdict is, light has come into this world, but the people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. And everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear of their deeds being exposed. But whoever lives by the truth and comes into the light, so that it may see plainly that we have done what has been done in God's sight. And so even when we talk about light at the very beginning of this, it kind of almost bookends itself with this idea in John 20. The idea of belief. Again, we've seen it all throughout the Gospel of John. But belief is obviously in this holiday season something that we talk about a lot. It's not just the knowledge, but how are we living it? Where are we having the confidence in trusting that God is the Messiah, the Son of God? Where are we really understanding and having that attitude, that confidence, that lifestyle that says, yes, I do believe this, and this is how I'm living it out? It's interesting that John is such a deep and theological book with so many complexities and such scholarly writing, and yet it's calling us to live more than just into our heads, but in our hearts as well. It's calling us to live this out in our everyday lives and to kind of tie all this head knowledge into our heart. It's not kind of a either or, but more of a both and. So in this book, we see the belief and this idea and really trying to live that out. But it's interesting the way that the scribe or the person who wrote this places this kind of cool verse in my head, kind of one of the last endings of this. He puts it right at the end of doubting Thomas. So Jesus comes in and peace be with you, and obviously Thomas says, no, I don't believe it, this can't be true. And then Jesus takes Thomas and, puts Thomas's hands where his holes are in Jesus's hands. So Thomas believes. And then Jesus says to him, because you have seen and you have believed, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. So even we see the disciples not believing, that doubting, but it's that continual faith that Jesus will show up. He'll have the answers. He'll be there. It may not be what we think or what we know, but he's always there and continue that belief. And so in the moments that we may not believe, in the moments that we might doubt, God is there. And again, with this idea of belief too, it's not just a one-time thing. In the Greek, every time it's used in these two verses, it's this idea of this continual belief. Every day we have to choose to believe in God and in Jesus and in his resurrection, to know that there are so many other things that we can believe, so many other voices in our heads or voices outside that are telling us what to believe, but it's our constant faith and constant lifestyle and attitude in that yes and amen that we choose to believe in the truth of who Jesus is. In the Gospel of John and the way that it's fulfilled, but also just in the entire scriptures. And so something that kind of struck me as well is by believing you may have life in his name. Again, this idea of life and light is a huge theme throughout the entire Gospel of John. And spoiler alert, it's fine. We're going to talk a lot about light and life in Advent, the expectation and the hope of Jesus' birth. Where are we waiting and patiently and expectantly to know that we have Emmanuel, God with us? And on that Christmas day to know that that light will shine even brighter because of the waiting that we've had. And so even in the Gospel of John, the amount of life and light, darkness that may be around us, there's so many cool things that we can tie our own lives into to know that there's such belief in this as well. So for me, this ending is a lot about the world and the world believing. The disciples coming in, believing, doubting, being themselves, being honest with themselves and having an honest conversation with Jesus and saying, help me in my disbelief, and Jesus always showing up. But Preston, you have kind of another ending into this a little bit, right? Something a little bit more deep and...
What's interesting is, and this is what's crazy about this, is that Charles Dickens writes a story about a tale of two cities. This John really, as we kind of touched on Sunday, is a tale of two endings. Because remember, the evangelist gets into the 20 and he starts to work and he starts to write and he starts to move. And in all of that, he ends it and it just kind of comes to a close. In 21, something else happens.
Yeah.
Another story starts to emerge. Some writer in the old times, maybe it was John, maybe it wasn't, we don't really know. They told another story. So for your ending, you've got the doubt of Thomas. And in the doubt of Thomas, you've got this belief, this disbelief.
Yeah.
I'm not going to believe Jesus until I put my hands on the place where you were crucified.
Yeah.
And so the world wants to see proof. And Jesus says there will be many in the world that will have believed and have not seen. So the first ending comes to bad. And the disciples, they kind of disappear into the future, into the background, and Thomas and those who have believed were there, and the story comes to an end. And then Peter goes out on a boat. Now, Peter and his story, he's been woven through this gospel in so many ways. And it's really Peter's the guy who's been woven through all the gospels. And as much as you and I want to love to hate Peter, because he's the guy.
Yeah.
And very much in Thomas's story, Peter's the guy that wants to touch. He wants to experience. And Peter, I'm jealous, got the chance to do it. He got to walk on the water, right? He rode all the roller coasters. He showed up to Six Flags with Jesus and rode all the roller coasters. He got to walk on the water. He got to be there for the water turning into wine. He said, Jesus, I don't want to just touch your hands. And I want to see it all. And he looks at Jesus and he says, don't just wash my feet, wash my whole body. This is the full experiential Peter. And I'm telling you, that would have been me, right? I want to do it all, Jesus. I don't want to miss any part of this experience. And yet it's also Peter who for the sake of his own life, denies Jesus 3 times. Turns us back on the God that he experienced the world with. The God that was in the beginning, but now is with Peter. So you've got Thomas who doubts. You've got Peter who's already doubted.
Yeah.
And in this world, all of a sudden now, Peter gets the chance to look at the full boat, like we talked about on Sunday, jump out of it, leave security behind, swim to Jesus, and now that iconic moment in 21 happens. Peter, do you love me? Well, here's where this belief of John isn't just for the world. In Lindsay's ending in chapter 20, because you wrote that, right?
Oh, yeah.
In chapter 20, in your ending, it's about the world believing without having to see. 21 is about Peter believing. Who cares about the world? Peter, what do you believe? Because these gospels in the first 19 chapters are written so that your head can, just like a class in seminary, just like a class in engineering, just like a class in English lit, wherever it is, you open up your head and you dump all this knowledge into it. You know about Jesus now, but Peter, and we know that Peter knows about Jesus, but Peter, do you believe? And with this belief becomes, well, it's not just a proclamation. It's not just a profession. For Peter, this belief becomes an action. Yeah. Do you believe, Peter? Yes, Lord, you know I do. Feed my sheep. Do you believe? Again, remember how many times has Peter denied Jesus? 3 times. How many times does he have to answer a question? Here, take care of my sheep. Mm-hmm. Do you believe? Go feed my lambs. It's not a proclamation of what I believe and what I know. Now all of a sudden, Peter has to decide for himself, am I going to follow? Am I going to do? Am I going to serve? Am I going to accept this responsibility? And on the 3rd time, he does. Make no mistake about it. When you read the book of John, when you open up its pages and you dive into the knowledge and the know-how of what it is, you can pour all of those stories and those definitions in your head. But when you get to these endings, the first one that Lindsay pushes you to know is, well, the whole world gets this chance. And everybody's loved by Jesus. The second ending is, now you have to make a decision. You have to believe. And your decision is not about checking a box, and it's not about getting a card-carrying membership card. Your decision now is about doing what Jesus calls you to do. And in this story, in this ending, it all comes down to you. And a crazy cool part happens in this story. All of a sudden, John evidently doesn't have to go to his death. It seems like Jesus says, look, Peter, you're going to end your life doing something that someone else has decided for you. And he really, really kind of foreshadows of the future of Peter's death in Rome. John, maybe not so much. And Peter says, well, what about the beloved disciple, the evangelist over here? And Jesus says, it doesn't matter about the rest of the world. It matters about you. Yeah. Do you believe? Do you make this commitment of love? And it's a commitment. It's not just a decision. It's this movement in my life that I'm going to do this. And what's amazing to me about this movement is what it buys Peter. William Barclay asked this question about what does it cost Peter to love? Well, Peter receives a lot. He becomes the head of the church. Still to this day, the largest church in the world bears Peter's name because he did ultimately accept the relationship and the commitment of love that he has for Jesus. But he also died on a cross. And it wasn't an easy life. So what is it that we give when we follow Jesus? It's not just about what we receive. Now this belief drives us to what we do. And I think the question in this is that both these endings are necessary. It's necessary for the fact that Jesus didn't come for a social club. Jesus came for the whole world. It says it in the beginning and it says it at the end.
Right.
But he also came for you. And he came for me. And he came for my belief. And one way or another, it matters. Standing in the midst of Kyle Field, it is a daunting place when all the Aggies, all in non-COVID years, 100,000 of them, will yell with one voice. And the greatest thrill of the crowd is when we yell so loud that the opposing quarterback has to call a timeout because he can't hear the snap. Or offsides happen because the field doesn't. The thing is, that kind of a community is what John 20 ends with.
Yeah.
Thomas, you have to have proof, but there will be thousands, millions of people in this world that will believe without having proof, and how strong will their faith be? But if every one decision of Aggies stopped yelling, if one person says, I'm just not going to yell today, my voice hurts. If everybody said that, there'd be nothing at all. Your personal decision to contribute to this, it matters. And it matters to God what you choose and how you put your voice into this great world of following Jesus. How do you see that belief in your life and the lives of the people around you? Do you see that as something that we take for granted? Do you think it's something that we hold on to? What do you think? Do you think this is something that we deal with on an everyday basis?
Yeah, I think for me it's just even hard to define belief or put that into like practical steps. I think is hard because you can say, I believe in Jesus. And then it's like, okay, yeah, me too. And then it's like, but what do you do? Like, is there anything, kind of that second point that you're talking to, I can believe, but how am I living it out on a daily basis? It kind of feels like, do you ever get student of the month when you were in elementary school at all? Yeah. So like those big words that I never knew, like perseverance or like responsibility. I'm like, yeah, Mom, I did this thing, And so again, with the belief, like, oh yeah, it's this big word that feels undefined. Especially, I've been watching Christmas movies lately. So watching the Santa Claus of like seeing is believing and all of that kind of stuff, and believing is seeing. And so even in our culture, this idea of belief, especially with the holiday seasons, it's just been interesting to see what do we believe? How do we live out our belief in Jesus to know, like you said, it is this big thing we do as a collective whole, as a community, but what does it look like intimately with Jesus and that kind of everyday life? And so for me, and what that kind of looks like is just spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices. Where can I believe that reading my Bible does matter? That I have a voice with Jesus in that conversation of prayer, to read scripture, to fast and to withhold and have some sort of self-control and say, death, you have no sting, and my bread and what sustains me is Jesus. And so in that accountability and community to be with people that say, hey, no, yeah, we believe in Jesus too, let's do this together. And so for me, belief looks like choosing and having a voice and being there with Jesus every day. As small as it might be, these small decisions of doing this every day make something bigger, make that big kind of moment in those big kind of discerning places as well in my own life.
You know what I love too about this is that the stars of the show at the end of John are not John and James, the sons of thunder.
Right.
They're not
Right,
the quiet fisherman Nathaniel or someone that kind of falls over. Not Matthew, the tax collector, the educated one. It's the doubters. It's like, it's the kids that didn't get student of the month, right? I mean, like let's be clear. I mean, Peter was chosen, but Peter was like that kid that was failing in class and talked too much and constantly got the disciplinary reasons, right? Like, Peter, what? Shh, stop. I'm trying to teach here.
Yeah.
Just sit down for a minute. He's like the ADHD kid, right? I mean, and then you've got Thomas who like wants everything spelled out. The teacher rolls their eyes. Everything is literal. Everything, there's no nuance at all for Thomas, right? So you got the two kids that they were not top of the class, and yet they're the ones that end the book for us. This gives me hope, right? That the people that did not receive Student of the Month out there, you're the ones that God's looking to at the end of life, right? To say, no, let's use these folks to define how this works. And Thomas isn't wrong. If Jesus was before me and I got the chance to prove it, would I be tempted? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If I got to experience it, remember, I'm just like Peter, right? It shocks me that Peter wasn't the one trying to touch it, everything, right?
Yeah.
If I was in Peter's shoes and the angry mob around the charcoal fire is going to take my life because I make a yes or no statement, and whether I die on a cross or not, that'd be tough,
Yeah.
right? But the thing is here is that in the end, both these disciples, despite all of their baubles in what they believe, they get the chance to answer the question, do you love me? We get the chance, despite all of our baubles in our life, to answer the question, do you love me? Do you believe? And my Christmas story growing up was the Polar Express.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't believe, you didn't hear the bell ring. And I always thought that it's such a negative ending to the story that even my sister, as she got older, couldn't hear the bell ring at the end of the story because her belief wasn't there. But maybe it's also a positive thing for us. If we can get 21 right, if you and I in our life can get 21 and say, I do believe. Yes, Lord, I do love you. And I've had moments in my life that I didn't hear the bell ring. And there's moments that I dropped the ball. And there's moments that I wanted proof. There's all of these moments in there. But today, I'm getting 21 right in this, right? I really do believe God. And when that happens, we can hear the bell ring. That's the direct relationship to the end of that story.
Yeah.
I get to hear the music of Jesus in my life if I can find a way to say, yes, Lord, I do love you. Yes, Lord, I do want to follow you. And it doesn't matter how many baubles we've had in our life. This is not an either or. It's about where do you find yourself right now? Because if Thomas and Peter get the chance to go back around another fire on the beach and get around Jesus and answer, yes, Lord, I do love you. I'm here. I'm all in. If they get second chances like that, so do we.
Yeah.
And if our belief leads us to that, the amazing thing is what Peter spent the rest of his life doing. And there's a question, do you love me more than these? That Jesus asked Peter. Well, when he says, do you love me more than these? The fish in the boat are right over here. Do you love me more than your security and that life over there? If you do, I'm going to lead you to a whole other place where you can hear the bell ring.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I wonder for us today is that do we have that kind of experience with God? And we're about to do this with confirmation in a couple weeks, where the kids will come down here on a Saturday and profess their faith in Jesus Christ. I've had that before, but I've had it multiple times. So did Thomas and Peter.
For sure.
Yeah. What else did you find this week that you think is important as we wrap all this up today?
Yeah, I think something for me too that was really powerful was actually in chapter 21, verse 12. So Jesus said, Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." And none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. And that really stuck out to me, kind of encapsulating all of John, because we do see Peter's life and the ups and downs in the Gospel of John. But he dare not ask because he knew the Lord. And I think, again, that daily walk with the Lord is how he knew. It wasn't anything else but that kind of daily knowing and seeing and trusting. Again, moments of belief and disbelief. Peter wasn't perfect, and we aren't perfect either. I mean, I've had moments in doubt and disbelief and belief, and mountaintop moments and valley moments, and the roller coaster ride of life. But knowing and trusting in ourselves that we know Jesus, I think, is something I've been hearing with college students, and I know I've experienced in my own life. Am I a Christian? Do I know Jesus? And having that confidence and being like, yes, not because I just read my Bible and check it off the list, but how am I living it out in my everyday life to really see it and kind of, yes, have the head knowledge, but also the heart knowledge as well, to really live it out and believe it, which I know is kind of one of those ambiguous words, but the fact that the disciples knew it was the Lord, I think really stood out to me. That daily conversion, that daily yes to Jesus. And how do I see that in my everyday life in those small moments? So I think that's what really kind of encapsulated, if there was an ending, and I wasn't, trying to be a scholar and say it was this, I think that phrase, they knew it was the Lord, was a really powerful ending for me.
So you've got a contrast today as we pull all this finally together for you. And the contrast is between Lindsay's chapter and my chapter. And the contrast is that in chapter 20, verse 10, there's this moment that we lifted up last Sunday, and the disciples all just went home. And God help us, in the midst of all that we look at and we see today, it's easy for us just to go home. Mm-hmm. And yet, I wonder if, like Peter, that we're sitting there on the shore and Jesus says, do you love me more than these? His boat, his fish, his catch, his friends, his comfort level here. Yeah. I wonder if we can say, yes, Lord, this is more than about me just going home. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in this crazy quarantine, somewhere in this crazy mess that we live in, I've got to find a way to say, yes, Lord, I do love you. And I'll follow you. And it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. How important is it for us to say that in 2020?
Right,
it doesn't matter what happens to the other disciple over here, right? Mm-hmm. It matters what happens inside my heart. Mm-hmm. Do I believe and do I love you? Right? And this is the thing. It's not for us about anymore, like Lindsay said, asking, who is this Jesus? You know who this Jesus is. You've walked through a Bible study with us. You come to church with us on Sunday. We pour into your head the definitions of 1 through 19. Mm-hmm. The question is, do you love me? Do you believe? Mm-hmm. And somewhere in this, we get to say, yes, Lord, I do. I'm not just going to go home again. I'm going to go do this with you. I hope you've enjoyed John. I hope you've found your belief again. I hope you've reconnected with Jesus on the shore. I hope that you have enjoyed our Dickens spin on a final ending of 20 and 21. I hope that your Bible doesn't end with 20, that you've got a 21st chapter. I hope your life doesn't end with 20. You've got a 21st chapter we're about to get ready to kick into. And I hope in our world that we get the chance today to say, yes, Lord, I'll follow you wherever you are. I hope you guys have a great week. It's been awesome doing this with Lindsay. It's been awesome doing this together. And we will continue to be in prayer for you as we continue to live in this holiday season.
Bye, everyone.